Welcome to Revolution of Purpose.
Episode 3.
This is Tracy Caldwell and
Kova Orent. And thanks so much for joining us today.
So on our last episode, we dove into a little bit of Kova's 36-day fast. And there is so much to dive into here. So we're going to pick it up there, unless there's anything you'd like to talk about first.
I was actually wanting to focus a little bit more on your story, and we could go back and forth between the two of us, because I know there's a lot of juice in that, and I'm happy to have more of a conversation as to like what that consisted of. And this podcast is about the both of us. So I want to make some time for you to share what brought you to this moment right now. And I'd love for you to start me at the point of the journey where you first got the call to traverse into the unknown.
We shall weave our journeys together. Me getting the call to traverse into the unknown, I wouldn't say it was quite a call. It was more a like thump in the face. I was in a 5-year relationship and that ended. I had just started experiencing psychedelics for the first time through a new friend. And I feel deeply grateful because she completely shifted my paradigm and my perception of the world that I was living in. And I went to Burning Man and everything changed after that. So I guess my call was really Burning Man, that there was a part of me that knew that I was supposed to go. I didn't have a ticket. I was going to a different event during the same exact time. And 2 days before, I was like, I really think I'm supposed to go to Burning Man. And a friend was like, yeah, you are. And another friend called me, was like, I have a ticket for you, Tracy. We're leaving in 2 days. Come with us. So that was really the beginning of my journey. So I started my journey really through a lot of, I guess, external experiences. Kova's experience was a little bit more internal through the water fast, whereas mine was very external. So I was playing with my external environment and seeing what I didn't even know what I was looking for, honestly.
I would call that seeking. You were seeking for answers. Is that accurate?
I was seeking. And I started listening to my intuition, even though I didn't know what that was at the time. So I just knew that I was supposed to go to Burning Man. After Burning Man, I found what they call playa love, which is love that you find on the playa, which is at the burn. I just decided to go visit him and ended up getting fired from my tech job because I wasn't supposed to work remotely, and I didn't tell them.
I want to take a step back right now because you're speaking from the mind.
I am.
A lot of these experiences were absolutely devastating to you. And I want to touch on the, when you receive the call, it often is out of a life that you've been living. And so you were saying that you experienced a 5-year breakup. And I know that's been something that you initially didn't really look at. You ran from, and it's not to your own.
That was part of my journey.
That was just part of your journey, and that's common. So I'm not blaming Tracy by any means or even judging her. I really want you to step on that, it was really a transition from who you were into something new. But I'd like for you to really touch on the moment that you knew that your life was going to change when that relationship ended.
Interesting. I actually knew that my life was going to change about 2 weeks before our relationship ended. We had just had a conversation around opening our relationship into polyamory, and that was a completely new concept to me at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my goodness, we can love multiple people, we can date multiple people. Did I have the level of integrity and self-awareness that would have been needed for that? No. However, it did open that door for me.
So let's tune it in right there. So you knew that your life was going to change. Can you tell me about the experience and what it felt like in your body when you knew that?
So I feel like it was almost the precursor to the actual breakup, but it felt like all of a sudden I had so much freedom that I had the capacity to do really anything that I wanted around the relational aspect of my life. And
what did you feel before you felt that freedom?
numb. Yeah. I was completely numb beforehand. Mm-hmm. The 5-year relationship had just slowly been dying for about 3 years. And my emotions were really repressed at the time, and I was kind of withering away as an individual and dying into the relationship, but not in an elevated way, more in a codependent, dying way.
Tell me what that meant to how you experienced your relationship with yourself.
I was my partner's girlfriend. That was my identity. I was working in corporate, so I was a corporate employee. I was a partner. I was a daughter. But really, I was just existing in the life that I was supposed to have. And I felt like the natural next step was going to be buying a house. And I started looking into it, and I was like, okay, what's that going to look like? And I chose the spot, and that was going to be the thing that was supposed to juice up my life again. And it just, luckily, I didn't actually pull the trigger on that. I needed to go on this journey instead.
Okay. And so you were saying that you were like numb and that you were disconnected and you were having all these identities of what you were to other people around you. But how is your relationship with yourself in this relationship at that time?
I don't think I had one, honestly. I didn't think about it. What is something that's not even noticeable?
Unconscious?
It was completely unconscious.
Got it.
To the point where I just thought that I was happy all the time. I was doing all the things that I was supposed to do. I was living my life in complete autopilot.
Well, that's also what you were told to do. Yeah.
100%.
So, okay, so you didn't necessarily know about your relationship with yourself at the time, but I'd love for you to tell people what were your negative coping skills that you experienced at that time?
Okay. I'd say my biggest one at the time was having my partner distract me and entertain me. So I was actually using our relationship as a way to distract myself from what I was feeling and what I was experiencing inside. So I actually didn't have any alone time. I was always with someone else, whether that was coworkers or my partner at the time or my phone. I didn't really get too much into binge watching TV. Binge eating was definitely a part of it. It was really just a bunch of different distractions of keeping myself really busy and not allowing myself to actually recognize that I was miserable, even though I thought that I wasn't.
Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing that, because I want people who are listening to this to be like, oh, I am experiencing those things, or, oh, I've overcome those things. Like, we don't really relate to other people until we hear, the challenges and stuff, and honestly, the struggle. So is there one memory in particular that you remember about you distracting yourself?
What's actually coming up for me is when the walls and the barriers and the protections that I had around my internal world and my emotions actually came down for a moment. So one of the few times that I felt truly connected to my partner after, say, year 3 was really when we would have edibles together. And so we were both high and we were having a good time, and I started laughing really, really hard, and I hit my head on the foot of the bed, and I just crumpled to the ground and started sobbing. And that was really a point where I could have noticed, hey, maybe there's something inside of you that you need to release, because normally you wouldn't cry that hard just hitting your head. But it was...
So tell me about that experience. So you cried really hard with hitting your head on something, and what was it like to be experiencing that when you weren't used to expressing?
Wow. On the one hand, it felt just so relieving. to be able to have an excuse to cry. Since in my household growing up, there wasn't sadness, really emotions, negative emotions weren't welcome. And if they were present, generally they were pushed out of the way, tried to subdue or make better, or even sent to my room and sent away from the family. Yeah, it was this element of having that feeling of catharsis and release. Mm-hmm. And then also I remember being a little bit embarrassed of why was I crying so much for this small little thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to summarize, I would say that I was doing all the things that I felt like I was supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. And I had numbed myself to an extreme so that I could actually pretend that I was enjoying it.
Mm-hmm. So when did the distractions start to be ripped off or torn away?
Okay, so for the breakup, that was the first time I ever did any self-reflection. And I don't remember where I got this recommendation from, but someone told me that I should journal. I think it might have been a cousin. So thank you to Jaya if you're watching this. And so I start journaling and I'm like talking about how I don't feel comfortable feeling my emotions with my partner or ex-partner at the time, even in the apartment. And that was really the first time I ever had any self-reflection and awareness of what I was experiencing internally.
Well, it sounds like you got invited to reflect, right? You had a relationship that ended after a period of time. The Band-Aid got ripped off. Oh my God, this is actually not what is your path, even though you thought it was and that you were doing the thing that you were supposed to be doing, but that was indeed not the path. So you got a chance to look at yourself for the first time, and what'd you find?
What I found was there were a lot of feelings inside and a lot of rules around not feeling them.
Oh no.
And so I was basically recognizing how much I didn't know who I was. So I started going to all these different events that I wouldn't normally go to and exploring and meeting new people. Yeah, which brought me on a whole long journey with lots of tools and experiences mm-hmm. and mistakes and learnings. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that was when I started to really seek. And I was very much looking outside of myself. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I think I needed that in order to get to the place that I am now.
Yeah, well, I want to acknowledge that. The seeking that was within you is often expressed externally. We start thinking that the answers are outside of us. And it sounds like you found out the answers were actually within you.
After many years.
So before we get to the answers inside, I think it's important for people to understand the journey that you went on to be able to find the answers from within. So can you tell the people who are listening to this a little bit about some of the peak experiences that you had? Let's just start with one for right now, because we'll be doing this back and forth in regards to telling us your story. So, you know, what happened before Burning Man?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So my best friend at the time, she invited me to my first ever festival. And it was a small 200-person bluegrass family festival in Colorado. And it was a completely new world for me. I had never experienced anything like it. We were camping with all of our neighbors, tents all next to each other, next to a river. It was beautiful. And she immediately makes friends with her neighbors and offers them something. And then in return, they're like playing music and we're all singing songs. And I'm like, what is this world? Because there I was being like a tech corporate person for so long. And I had experienced like different sports teams, but nothing like that. There was one day where I went out by myself. And that was new for me because generally I was with a partner or a friend, and I was able to give my authority away to the person that I was with. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really have to make decisions for myself, and I could kind of just flow with them and have them steering the ship. So I was by myself, and it started raining. And I was completely alone. I had found some friends there and made some friends, but they weren't with me at the time. And I remember I left. They had closed the gates because it was raining, so they didn't want anyone else to enter. And I step outside the gates, and two of my new friends were there, and I just burst into tears with gratitude of, oh my goodness, there are people who really want to spend time with me and who are really excited about me.
So what's coming up for you as you say that?
I guess it was that I could feel such closeness mm-hmm. and loyalty with people that I had just met. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that was very new for me. Mm. Yeah.
What's that feel like in your body right now?
Feeling of relief and being held. And trust. Yeah. I think it was the first time that I recognized that I could be taken care of in a bigger way than just my immediate surroundings and the people that I knew. It was a bigger than me trust and faith. So I guess you could call it universe or God. Like, wow, I'm actually being looked out for. Because I was in a place of being like, oh my goodness, I'm all alone. I don't have any friends. I don't know what I'm doing. Almost reaching a place of panic. And then I found these two friends, and my entire system was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Something that we'll probably be mentioning a fair amount in this podcast is the surrender experiment. And
that's by Michael Singer.
Mm-hmm.
He is the best-selling author of The Untethered Soul.
Yes. And I unintentionally went on a surrender experiment. And I found that for the most part, a lot of my surrender was at festivals. So I spent a lot of time at festivals for the past 5 years, really. No? 4?
I think you really outgrew that when we met.
That's true.
Because that's not how I received my personal development. That's how you receive yours.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, that experience of being held and wanted and part of something greater than yourself, how did that impact your relationships with festivals?
Oh. Interesting. It opened up my mind to the possibility that magic and miracles exist. So I basically went from being very much in the mundane to, things outside of the ordinary are possible here.
And it sounds like that's also what kept drawing you back over and over and over again.
Not quite. That's an element of it.
Okay.
But I was also gathering different tools and meeting the right people, and they were connecting me to the next step in my journey. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't necessarily sure where to go. And then I would feel a yes in my body of, oh, this is the next thing to go to. And I would go there. I would meet the right person. I would receive a modality, whatever it was. And that would bring me to the next thing.
Okay. So tell me about that first experience, that like small festival somewhere in Colorado with your friend that eventually made you realize that the mystical and the mundane, the mystical and the magical can be experienced in such an environment. What was it that got you to go to that? And then how did life change? And what did you do with yourself after that first one?
Oh, wow. Okay, there is one more piece. It was also very permission giving. So all of a sudden I saw all these people who were more expressed than I had ever really experienced. So people were dancing full out in their joy because they wanted to dance. They were barefoot on the earth. They were on different medicines. They were singing. They were interacting with people. They were starting new conversations with strangers. There were hugs everywhere. It was just like this really beautiful, loving experience that I had never experienced before. I had gotten a taste of it in college through my amazing Jewish boyfriend who had such a loving family. And I feel so grateful for that. But in terms of that freedom of expression, that was completely new for me.
Okay. So what did that mean to you when you saw that for the first time?
That I could be myself. Because everyone was weird there. So I was like, oh, everyone's weird doing their own thing and sharing themselves in their own particular flavor. So that means that I have permission to do the same.
I want to just make sure that was weird the right word to describe it, because weird oftentimes has the connotation of being negative, or judging.
I actually don't view weird that way.
Okay, cool. As long as we're on the same page about that.
I view weird as authentic, actually.
Okay, cool. We're glad we're on the same page. So weird, she means it's authentic for everybody.
Yeah. And that, I guess, in our typical society where if you've grown up in a pretty boxed in way of being, which means don't move around too much, sit still in school, don't get up, wait until you're called on, say the right thing. There are just so many rules and ways of being. Like, if everyone else is standing, you need to stand too. If everyone else is sitting, sit.
What I'm hearing from Tracy is that she's talking about something called cultural conditioning.
Yes.
Cool. So would you like to describe to everyone what cultural conditioning is?
So cultural conditioning is the conditioning and the programming that we receive through living in our culture. So there's societal norms and expected ways of being and interacting. And part of that actually really allows the society to work in a way that is cohesive and supportive of each other. And some of it is also death to the individual and the soul.
And I'd like to tack on there, oftentimes the cultural conditioning is something that's passed down on, and there are rules, also known as rules by Vishen Lakhiani, which are bullshit rules that a lot of us have inherited. It's kind of like an operating system that we've put on the piece of hardware that is the intelligence of our body, but we actually haven't gotten to choose the software that we have. So we've inherited all of these different programs. And what Tracy, I believe, is talking about is she started to realize that there were all these bullshit rules that she inherited that sounds like you actually, that were preventing you from being yourself.
Yes. So I basically found a space where I felt safe enough to practice being me for the first time in my life, really, except for when I was a really young child. So I was really blessed to grow up in nature and to spend a lot of time in the woods and with different animals and creatures and the earth and making fairy houses. So I was really blessed in that way to have a deep connection to the outdoor world.
So will you tell me about that first moment that you realized that you could be yourself at that festival? And is there an actual specific memory that you had of actually being yourself for the first time in that environment?
Probably that moment, honestly.
Yeah, okay.
Because I saw them and like they both hugged me and I just burst into tears.
Okay.
And oh my goodness, and I still want to cry about it. But yeah, I just completely like fell into their arms and they were holding me and I was crying and I was completely accepted in my sadness.
Yeah.
And that was completely new. And it meant a lot to me.
I'm hearing that environment gave you permission to be yourself for the first time in your entire life. Yeah. Even though you grew up in a really nurturing environment, you still didn't necessarily grow up in an environment that promoted you to be yourself. And not just you, but like the culture itself. So being in that environment got you to experience that, feel seen, feel wanted, feel accepted for you, who you were naturally. Is that the catalyst that changed the trajectory of your life path?
That was definitely one of them.
Okay.
But I do want to take a step back here.
Yeah.
I actually found that in my upbringing, there were certain aspects of me that were celebrated and certain aspects that were not. So when it comes to the festival world and that experience that I had there, it really felt like I had permission to practice and to try on different hats and ways of being. So it wasn't necessarily that I wasn't allowed to be me at home. It was more that certain aspects of me weren't celebrated.
Okay, got it.
So being in that space, I felt like I was able to practice, like, okay, what happens if I speak with a weird accent all day? Or if I'm very theatrical whenever I interact with people? Or if I say hello to every single person I interact with? Like, what happens in all those different dynamics? So for me, it was just this huge playground of how do I want to show up in this world and what are the effects of it?
So from that experience, how did that first experience change the trajectory of your path? Like what happened once you left that festival and how did it change your trajectory?
Well, that just opened the door for all the other festival experiences. So that was actually I went to another one after that, and then it was Burning Man. So I really jumped in head first. But I think that experience actually opened the door for me to move in with my roommate after that. I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have understood each other or gotten along if I hadn't had that experience, because she was already in that world. And when I met her for the first time, there was this immediate connection. And it felt really true for me to move in. So I moved in closer to the mountains. I moved out of my partner's apartment, which was really a good thing at the time, even though I was like, I'm going to just stay here. My best friend was very helpful in encouraging me to move. So I appreciate all the guidance that I had along the way.
And do you want to touch on that real quick? Why did you not want to leave?
There was a part of me that thought that it would be really good for us to just become friends and to work through anything that was there. But the issue there was that I didn't have the tools or the emotional responsibility to actually work through that. So it probably would have just been awful.
And why did you think you had to keep living with her to become her friend?
There was a part of me that knew that we were about to take very different paths.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were trying to hold on.
Probably. There was definitely some attachment there.
Gotcha. And what do you mean by attachment?
It's generally an emotional attachment. So that if something were to happen, then we would have an emotional response. So there's a holding on to something because of the resistance to feeling that emotion.
So I'm going to drill down right now because that's straight from the mind. So will you tell me about specifically what was your attachment and what was the feeling that you were trying to avoid in not leaving the apartment with your then ex-partner?
Okay. So of course, right. So the attachment was that she represented my entire life and that I had built my entire life on her. Essentially, I was going to experience deep despair, complete fear, confusion, instability. Basically, everything that I didn't want to experience was hinged on that relationship ending. So that relationship ending basically meant that I had nothing to stand on that I had built.
Got it. So you were attached to not letting go of what you had because you didn't know what was on the other side of it.
Yeah. And generally it does come down to fear of the unknown.
Yeah. And I want you to speak for yourself there. Like, what was the fear that you had in letting go of your previous partner?
For me, it was more despair rather than fear. I guess it was, okay, I guess this goes to the revolution part. Basically, for me, it was a death of the self.
Which means?
Every single aspect of me that I thought I knew.
Including your life.
What do you mean my life?
Your perception of yourself and your life.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So what I knew of myself, of my life, of my reality, just completely shattered in that moment. Mm-hmm. So yeah, of course I had some attachment to my past way of being, of the version of Tracy that I was at the time, because that was all I knew.
And so what I'm hearing out of that, I really want you to describe to people what this is, because this is relevant to the name of the podcast. You just said that you didn't want to go through a death process. And I don't think you knew at the time that it was necessarily a death process, but It's been many years since then. So what makes you say now that you didn't want to go through a death process?
So what was the question? Why didn't I want to go through a death process?
I mean, you didn't know it was a death process, but now you know it was a death process. So what in you, like...
Well, it was this interesting dichotomy where there was part of me that really wanted freedom and to fully dive into the fullness of life again, because I had reached such a depth of dullness within myself that I felt like I was already dead in a way because I wasn't living.
Sounds like purposelessness to me.
Yes. And then the other part of me was like, well, this is all I know, and I don't know what's on the other side. So the fear of the unknown, the fear of what the heck is next.
Why was that considered a death process?
So basically, I needed to let go of the identity of Tracy at that moment. Mm-hmm. Tracy was girlfriend, corporate employee, working in a tech startup company. Yeah, it was just like this cookie cutter nice girl who was following all the rules. And all of a sudden, that part of me, like, it wasn't a gentle, I think it pretty much exploded. It was like a shattering explosion of death. And in a way that was also, it felt very freeing. So it
created liberation.
Yeah, so it's definitely liberating to experience that. Some deaths of identities can be a lot heavier than that, but that one felt very freeing.
Okay, and so let's go into that a little bit deeper. So you're saying a death of an identity occurred when you needed to move out of your previous partner's house. Can you give a name to that identity?
Oh, goodness. There's probably an archetype around this, honestly. The people pleaser I've been working with for a really long time.
Conformist?
Yeah, the conformist probably.
Okay. So you basically realized that the conformist part of you needed to be let go, but you also didn't know how to let it go either.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah.
So the way I would handle it today versus how I handled it at the time is very different. And with that being said, a lot of my letting go of it was more through becoming and taking the action to become the new version of me. I was taking on all these experiences, and I was meeting completely different new people, and started just doing something completely different in my life. Mm-hmm. And that definitely is a way that you can do it. And you'll notice that in the way that I've been describing this, that there is some emotion here. So I haven't fully released it.
The specific memory?
This specific transition in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That there's still more gold to mine from this experience.
So knowing what you do know about death and rebirth now, like those are two sides of the same coin, and the gift being revolution. Like, we're speaking of the gene keys, and that's a whole other conversation, but it's just called an archetype. So,
but if you are interested in this key, you're welcome to look at the 49th gene key.
Yeah. So when you look at that now, knowing what you know now, like, can you give the listener an explanation of like how that was a revolution for you? How that was a revolution of purpose for you?
I guess at the time I had no idea it was a revolution of purpose, and with that framework, what I'm seeing is that really I was in an evolution of being. So I was essentially breaking free of the chains that I had been in, that were self-imposed, of course.
And some were unconscious.
Some were, well, of course.
Yeah.
They were unconscious and self-imposed. And I was breaking free of that system into a new way of being and becoming. Mm-hmm. So in terms of purpose, my purpose really became seeking, figuring out what the purpose is, who I am, what I'm doing with my life. And I did that for 5 years. So that was quite the beginning of a 5-year journey.
So that point of like, you know, when your friend was like, Tracy, you need to move out of that house. And you were like, you were in resistance to moving out of the apartment because that would have required you to let the conformist part of you die, basically, and for you to be birthed into something new that you didn't even know was within you specifically.
Yes.
And really it opened up this trajectory that created an entire new life path full of lots of different experiences and people and learning and ultimately wisdom that you've cultivated in really finding out who you are and what you're here for.
Yeah, 100%. And the other side of that jump of leaving what I knew, my home, and finding a new apartment, I actually found this incredible house with this incredible woman that we really clicked. And we had 4 chickens, and that actually was the... I know.
Always comes back to the chickens.
Now?
She always wants chickens, even though they wake me up. The eggs are great, though.
That's for a different time. But basically, I found, looking back on those experiences, that every single experience that I had really set me up for success for the next one. So, for example, living at a house that had 4 chickens, I was actually prepared to live on a homestead afterwards that had 30 chickens. So it's just an evolution. And was I necessarily on the chicken path? No, that was not part of my intention. However, it was part of my journey, and it was important to me.
And real quick, why is the emphasis on chickens?
That's fair. Okay. So the reason why chickens are important is because they actually can be a foundation of self-sustainability. So it actually helps us to step out of the reliance on our food system and our grocery stores. It brings the food source to our backyards so that we can actually produce our own food. So not only do the chickens produce eggs, but their waste also gives back to the earth so that it can grow really, really rich soil, and then that helps to grow produce. So it can be this whole biodynamic system that is really self-sustaining.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. I know that was totally off topic, but I feel like I needed to go there because you had such an emphasis on it that it needed to be explained.
Yeah. And so part of my experience after that, which we will not talk about today.
But stay tuned. There's more.
Part of that was living on a biodynamic ranch where I got to experience really sustainable practices.
I would actually say regenerative. They were above sustainable.
They were regenerative practices.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really special experience, and I learned a lot there.
So I just want to bring us to the beginning of the conversation, because I think we're wrapping up this episode with the beginning of your journey right now. Is like, when was the beginning? Like, when did your first call occur? And one of the things about the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, is that the call is often not received on the first call. And it sounds like your first call was actually your friend requesting that you move out of your previous partner's home, and you didn't want to leave, but you ended up leaving.
Well, that was after we broke up.
So that was the catalyst.
I'd say the call was actually the breakup.
The call is directly what the call is meant to basically bring you from the life you've been living to the new experience of life that's on the other side of this. So I think not discounting that the breakup wasn't the call. I'm thinking more the call was actually her asking you to leave the house, and the breakup was actually a catalyst.
That's fair.
Yeah, you did not want to leave. And that's a normal part of the hero's journey, is like you get the call and you're like, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. But then you try to go back. But like where you've come from is like burning down, right? Like you can't go back to like where you were.
I don't know. I'd actually say the call was the festival.
Interesting.
Because that opened my eyes up to a new perspective. It was almost like seeing, like, if you look at Lord of the Rings and Bilbo, right? Mm-hmm. Bilbo leaves his small little town for the first time and is like, oh, wow, there's this whole other world out there. Mm-hmm. So it was more like that for me, where I saw the possibility of what was there.
But then you had to get called out of the old world into the new world.
Right.
And it could have been a threshold, honestly. It sounds like it was a threshold. And there's always like a gatekeeper or something at the threshold that prevents you from going through the threshold. In this case, it was like the attachment to letting go of the old version of you to experience the new version of you. This is also coming from someone who studied the hero journey at depth. So that's why I'm like, what part of the story and part of the hero's journey was it? And it's also helpful for our structure and how we communicate this to everybody.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you want to add? You know, we went really deep today and we really got down to I know your body just responded to that because it was very vulnerable with you to go with what you just communicated, you know, your experience at the festival and then even the experience of needing to let go of that part of you that didn't want to leave. Most people wouldn't necessarily want to say that. And at the same time you did. And I want to acknowledge you specifically for that.
It makes sense. I was in a 5-year relationship and my entire life was built upon it.
Yeah.
So of course I was attached.
Yeah, of course. The Buddha says, you know, that's one of our...
Attachment is suffering.
Yes, exactly. So it's part of humanity. You know, we have compassion for our humanity for accidentally getting attached to things, of course. But is there anything that you're wanting to say in regards to this part of your story?
I guess that for me, a lot of my journey was pendulum swinging. So basically going from one end of the spectrum to the opposite. For example, at the beginning, I went from like complete conformist, goody two-shoes, following all the rules, doing all the shoulds, following like the white picket fence American dream, trying to like create that whole experience.
The relationship elevator. Have you heard that one?
No.
You find the person, then you get married, then you have kids, and then, you know, it's like an elevator of how the relationship is supposed to go.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was following that. And I was doing it well. I was like, look at me go. I'm like moving up, doing the things. I went from that extreme to like the rebel and like the rule breaker. And I was like, how much can I go against everything that I've experienced in my past?
Sounds like a revolution of purpose to me.
There we go. Yeah. So that was part of my journey. And right now I'm actually coming back to center.
I think it's a continuous effort of coming back to center.
It's an ever refinement.
Yeah, totally. Well, is there anything else you want to say to everyone before we close out?
That this was part of my journey and everyone's journey looks different. Mm-hmm. So this was the way that was natural and true for me to go through. And yours might look completely different than this. Mm-hmm. So 36-day water fast, festival, medicine journeys, that whole thing. There is definitely other paths. Yeah. So I just want you to know that these are two examples, and yours might look completely different.
It's true. And one of the reasons I was going so deep with you today was to be like, let's bring you down to like your true humanity of what were you experiencing and what did it feel like and what did that mean for you? So that regardless of who you are or where you are in your journey, that it's possible that you could relate to either of us and see yourself in us and realize that that's just part of the path. And it's not good. It's not bad. It doesn't need to be changed. It's just part of the path. And it might not be part of your path at all. However, it gets you to understand Tracy a little bit more and understand how she is currently here with me speaking to you about revolution of purpose.
Yes. Welcome to the Tracy roots.
I think what I want to close on is that everyone's revolution looks different, right? And I think that's what you were saying. It's like everyone's path, but I'm going to actually imprint the word revolution. Everyone's revolution looks different. Like Tracy was like being a rebel and like going against the grain and like doing the thing that everybody wasn't doing and like all those types of things. And that was like what Tracy's revolution looked like. But what I encourage you to do if you're listening to this is like reflect on what does your revolution look like? What did your revolution look like in the past? What was it in yourself that got you to realize that the life you weren't living was no more and that there was a new version of you that was ready to be expressed, that there was a new experience of reality that was on the other side of you, really letting go of who you were and really stepping into who you're meant to be.
Until next time.
that reminds me of like the night show, the nightly Saturday. Until next time on Saturday Night Live, we will see you soon. You have a good one.
Bye.